Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I've asked 4 of my friends to send me their best tanks for me to review. I'll be basing this on 2 factors. 1. Proportions. For this, I look at the shape of the tank, and see if it is proportionally accurate to the real tank, and I will rate this on how close I think it is. 2 is detail. For this, I look at how much care was put into detailing the tank. Like in my video about improving your tanks, a tank can be near perfect proportionally and still be mediocre if it lacks sufficient detail. With that out of the way, let's take a look at our submissions. Starting off, we have Foxfrost XP, who has submitted 3 of his tanks, a Stug, a Tiger, and a KV2. I think of all of these, my least favorite is the KV2. It appears to be a little too wide, but other than that, the proportions are alright, so I will rate the proportions a 6 out of 10. It doesn't really seem to have any unique detail to it, so I will have to give detail on it a 2 out of 10. In total, that averages out to a 4 out of 10 for the KV2. Decent proportionally, but I think it definitely needs more detail. Then we have the Stug. This is definitely better than the KV2. The proportions are still a little off. I think it is still a little wide, and the tracks look a little too short. So I will give it a 6 out of 10 for proportions. The detail on this one is better than the KV2, but still somewhat lacking, so I will rate it a 4 out of 10. Overall, that makes the Stug a 5 out of 10 build overall. Now for what I think is the best of the 3, the Tiger. The proportions on the hull are near perfect, but the upper front plate is a little too tall. The turret is also very good, but I think the commander's cupola and the gun mantlet could use some work, so proportions get an 8 out of 10. The detail on this tank is also very decent. The road wheels are somewhat detailed, and there are things like logs and grenades on the hull. I will rate the detail a 5 out of 10, which makes this Tiger overall a 6.5 out of 10. Overall, Foxfrost has some alright builds, but I do think they could use a little more detail. Another thing to add is that Foxfrost is a mobile user, so I will cut him some slack for that. Next, we have Gaming is Awesome, who has submitted his T-72B3 and his M28A1 Eisenhower. Starting with the T-72, I think overall it is very well made. The proportions on the hull are very good, however I think the turret is a little small as well as disproportionate. I will cut gaming some slack though because the T-72 turret is probably one of the hardest shapes to build, hands down. I give the T-72's proportions a 6 out of 10. I think the detail on the T-72 is very good overall, but could definitely be improved. The T-72 has so many small details to nail on it, so I think there is some room for some small improvement all around. I will give detail an 8 out of 10, making the T-72 a solid 7 out of 10 tank. Now, we have the M28A1 Eisenhower. This one's a little tricky to rate because it is a custom-made tank. Overall though, I do think the proportions are pretty good and realistic, but I personally don't really like the shape of the turret front. I think it needs more than just a simple circle for a gun mantlet to be improved, and so I will give the proportions a 7 out of 10 for that reason. Detail-wise, this thing's amazing, especially at the rear end with the storage racks on the turret. The only real area I could think could use improvement is once again the turret front, which seems lacking in detail compared to the rest of the tank. I give detail a 9 out of 10, which makes this tank overall an 8 out of 10. Next, we have Arisu, who has submitted 6 of her tanks. I think I can pretty much say the same thing for all of them, so I'll make this section quick. The proportions are near perfect on all of them, with a few small errors, but nothing that's big enough to really deduct too many points, so I will give her tanks a general 9 out of 10 for proportions. For detail, Arisu easily has some of the most detailed tanks of any tank builder. Pretty much all of her tanks have an extremely high amount of detail all around the tank, so I rate detail a 10 out of 10 for all of Arisu's tanks, which makes them overall a 9.5 out of 10. Finally, we have Mako Reverse, who has submitted 2 of his T-34 tanks, more specifically the 76 and 85 variants, as well as his EBR-105. Starting off with the T-34-85, I think the proportions on it are near perfect, and I don't really see anything that sticks out as inaccurate, aside from the front plate, which looks like it could be angled slightly more. I rate the proportions an 8 out of 10. For detail, it is also very solid. The use of colors, writing, equipment, and other stuff works perfectly for it, but I do think it could use some slight improvements here and there. I will give detail an 8 out of 10 also, which makes this tank an 8 out of 10 overall. For the T-34-76, I can really just say the same things as the T-34-85. The proportions and detail are still very good, so I will give the T-34-76 the same rating of 8 out of 10. And for our last build submission, we have the EBR-105. Like the T-34, proportion-wise this vehicle is near perfect, with very little visible error, so I will also give this vehicle an 8 out of 10 for proportions. For detail, I think this tank really stands out. Normally, I would say that bright colors are bad on tanks, but here I think it really looks good. I really like the glowing blue neon blocks for the lights on the vehicle, and the things like the insignia on the vehicle, which really complete the appearance of the vehicle. I rate the detail an 8 out of 10, which once again makes this vehicle an 8 out of 10 overall. And those are all the tanks I have to review for this video. I hope that this was informative not only for the people who submitted these tanks, but to all of you, who can use what I've said in this video to improve your own tanks. I may have my own Discord server up in the coming months, so if you want me to review your tanks, stay tuned for that. Anyways, that's everything I've got to say. Thanks for watching, and see you all later.